The cold was a living thing. It gnawed at the tips of her fingers, a predator of ice and wind that had long since devoured any memory of warmth. Alara's knuckles were split and bleeding, the raw skin a stark, angry red against the unforgiving white of the snow. She ignored the pain. Pain was a constant companion, as familiar as the gnawing hunger in her belly or the worthlessness branded onto her soul. They called her Omega. It was a word spat at her, a label that meant less than nothing. She was the pack's shadow, the ghost who scrubbed floors and hauled water, visible only when someone needed a target for their cruelty. Her parents were gone, lost to the rotting fever when she was just a child, and the pack's grief had curdled into blame. They said her parents had brought the sickness from the lowlands. They said she was cursed. So she was cast out, not from the territory, but from the pack's heart. She lived in a drafty lean-to behind the kitchens, surviving on scraps and the meager coin she earned from the herbs she gathered. Her fingers, clumsy with cold, fumbled with the stem of a frost-kissed kingsfoil plant. Its silvery leaves were potent against winter chills, a small mercy in this cruel season. She tucked it carefully into the worn leather pouch at her hip, the scent of pine and frozen earth clinging to her thin clothes. This was her life, a desperate scrabble for roots and leaves at the edge of the world. A laugh, sharp and cruel as breaking ice, shattered the silence. Alara flinched, her shoulders hunching instinctively. She didn't need to look to know who it was. Lyra, daughter of the Pax Beta, beautiful and venomous, with eyes the color of a winter sky. "Look what the blizzard dragged in," Lyra sneered, her voice carrying easily on the biting wind. She was flanked by two others, their faces pinched with the same casual disdain. They were wrapped in thick furs, their cheeks rosy with warmth and health. They looked like goddesses of winter, and Alara, a frozen grub in the snow. "Still digging in the dirt, Omega," one of them chimed in. "Don't you ever get tired of smelling like mud and misery?" Alara kept her head down, focusing on the dark earth peeking through the snow. If she didn't look at them, if she didn't speak, maybe they would grow bored and leave. It was a foolish hope, a child's wish she had never quite managed to outgrow. A boot, trimmed with soft rabbit fur, kicked her pouch. The precious herbs scattered across the snow, a constellation of green and silver against the white. "Oops," Lyra said, her voice dripping with false sympathy. A strangled sound escaped Alara's throat. That was a morning's work. That was her dinner. Maybe even 2 dinners if she was careful. She scrambled to gather the scattered leaves, her raw fingers stinging as they plunged into the icy powder. Lyra's boot came down on her hand, pinning it to the frozen ground. The pressure was immense, grinding the delicate bones against the unyielding earth. Pain, white-hot and blinding, shot up Alara's arm. She cried out, a thin, pathetic sound that was swallowed by the wind. "Leave her alone," Alara whispered, the words tasting of blood and snow. Lyra laughed again. "Did the little mouse squeak? What will you do, Omega? Bite my ankle?" She pressed down harder. "You are nothing, a speck of dust. You are lucky we let you breathe our air." Each word was a hammer blow, reinforcing the cage of worthlessness she lived in. Nothing. Less than nothing. Tears froze on her lashes, tiny daggers of ice. She squeezed her eyes shut, fighting the wave of despair that threatened to drown her. She would not break. She could not. Breaking meant dying, and some stubborn, infuriating part of her refused to die. She gritted her teeth, the sound a faint grinding in the vast, cold silence. She focused on the pain in her hand, letting it burn away the humiliation. She focused on the scent of the crushed kingsfoil beneath her palm. She would endure this. She had endured worse. Finally, Lyra seemed to tire of her sport. She lifted her boot, leaving a muddy imprint on the back of Alara's hand. "Pathetic," she sniffed, turning away. "Let's go. The stench of failure is making me sick." They walked away, their laughter trailing behind them like a poison cloud. Alara remained kneeling in the snow for a long time, cradling her throbbing hand. She gathered what was left of her herbs, her movements slow and stiff. She would not cry. Tears were a luxury she could not afford. Instead, she pushed the pain and the shame down into that hard, secret place inside her, the place where she kept her will to live. She stood up, her legs trembling, and turned her face back toward the deeper woods. She still needed more herbs. She still needed to survive. The wind began to howl not long after. It was no longer just a bite of cold. It was a physical assault. The sky, a placid gray moments before, curdled into a churning mass of bruised purple and black. Snow began to fall, not in gentle flakes, but in a blinding horizontal sheet. The world dissolved into a maelstrom of white. Panic, cold and sharp, pierced through the dull ache of Alara's misery. This was no ordinary squall. This was a white death, a blizzard that could strip flesh from bone and freeze a person solid in minutes. The path back to the village was gone, erased. Every direction looked the same, a terrifying, swirling vortex of snow and ice. She stumbled forward, pulling her thin cloak tighter. It offered as much protection as a spider's web. The wind sliced like claws, stealing her breath and burning her exposed skin. She couldn't see. She couldn't think. Her only instinct was to move, to keep moving, lest the cold claim her for good. How long she walked, she didn't know. Time lost all meaning in the roaring chaos. Her feet were numb, her legs heavy as stone. The hope that had been a stubborn ember was now just cold ash. This was it. This was how she would die. Alone, frozen in the woods, a forgotten footnote in the pack's history. The thought brought a strange, bitter peace. Then the ground vanished beneath her. One moment she was fighting her way through a snowdrift, the next she was falling. She landed with a jarring impact, the air forced from her lungs in a painful gasp. She had fallen into a ravine, a shallow one, but the snow had cushioned her just enough to save her from broken bones. It had also buried her. She clawed her way to the surface, sputtering, her body screaming in protest. Her ankle twisted beneath her, and a fresh wave of agony washed over her. It was broken, or at least badly sprained. She was trapped. It was then, as she lay there, a broken thing ready to be swallowed by the storm, that she saw it, a dark shape against the white, a deeper shadow in the swirling gray. A cave. A small opening in the rock face almost completely obscured by snow. It was a chance, a sliver of impossible hope. With a guttural cry born of pure desperation, Alara began to crawl. She dragged her useless leg behind her, her raw hands digging into the snow, pulling herself forward inch by painful inch. The cave was a promise of shelter, a haven from the storm's relentless fury. It was life. The entrance was narrow, a tight squeeze that scraped her shoulders. She tumbled inside, landing on a floor of cold, hard stone. The roar of the wind was instantly muffled, reduced to a distant moan. The darkness was absolute, a profound and welcome silence after the blizzard's shriek. She lay there, gasping, her body a symphony of pain. But she was alive. She was out of the wind. As her eyes slowly adjusted to the gloom, she realized she was not alone. A shape lay in the back of the small cave. It was massive, far too large to be a normal wolf. A low sound rumbled from it, a growl of pure agony that vibrated through the stone floor and into her bones. It was the sound of a dying predator. Fear, primal and immediate, seized her, but it was quickly overshadowed by something else. Pity. The same instinct that made her tend to a bird with a broken wing, the same kindness she had never been shown herself, rose within her. She pushed herself up, dragging her body deeper into the cave. The scent of blood, coppery and thick, hit her then. It was a lot of blood. A flicker of something unnatural, a faint internal light, seemed to pulse from the wounded creature. It was a man. He was huge, built on a scale that seemed impossible, with shoulders as broad as a doorway. He was clad in dark, torn leathers, and a great, gaping wound marred his side, dark and sluggish in the faint light. His face was all harsh angles and predatory beauty, framed by a mane of raven black hair. Even unconscious, he radiated an aura of immense power, a silent thunder that filled the small space. He was dying. She could see it in the pallor of his skin beneath the grime, hear it in the ragged, shallow breaths he took. Without thinking, Alara shed her pouch of herbs. Her mind, usually clouded with fear and self-doubt, became sharp and clear. This was something she understood. Wounds, pain, healing. She found what she was looking for: the crushed kingsfoil, a few leaves of yarrow to staunch the bleeding, and a tough, stringy root called bindweed. She had nothing to grind them with but her own teeth. She chewed the bitter leaves into a crude poultice, her stomach rebelling at the taste. Crawling to his side, she hesitated for only a second. His skin was feverishly hot to the touch, a raging inferno beneath the icy surface. With trembling hands, she pulled aside the torn leather to get a better look at the wound. It was deep, jagged, and crusted with drying blood. It looked like it had been caused by claws dipped in poison. The edges were blackened and necrotic. She took a deep breath. "This will hurt," she whispered, though she doubted he could hear. She pressed the poultice into the wound. The moment her fingers, slick with the herbal paste, made contact with his burning skin, the world exploded. It wasn't a sound. It was a feeling. A cataclysm of light and heat erupted from the point of contact, searing through her as if she'd grasped a bolt of lightning. A scream was torn from her throat, but it was lost in the silent, psychic roar that filled her mind. White-hot agony shot up her arm, centering on her collarbone. It felt as if a blacksmith's brand was being pressed into her flesh, burning through skin and muscle and bone, marking her down to her very soul. She saw flashes of images not her own. A silver throne in a vast hall of stone. A lonely vigil under 1,000 alien stars. The crimson rage of a battlefield. A desperate, centuries-long search for a face he'd only seen in dreams. His memories. His loneliness. His pain. Through the blinding agony, she felt him. Not just his physical presence, but the ancient, powerful core of his being. It was a force of nature, a mountain, a storm, and it was reaching for her, recognizing her, claiming her. The man's eyes snapped open. They were not the eyes of a mortal. They were molten gold, swirling with amber light and ancient power, glowing with an impossible intensity in the dark cave. They fixed on her, and in their depths, she saw no confusion, no pain from his wound. She saw only a staggering, soul-shaking certainty. He didn't move. He didn't have to. His gaze was a physical force, pinning her in place. The inferno on her skin began to coalesce, the pain sharpening into a single, intricate point just below her collarbone. A deep voice, a rumble like the shifting of tectonic plates, filled the small cave. It was not a question. It was a statement of fact, a truth spoken into existence after an eternity of waiting. Mine. Alara stared, her heart hammering against her ribs like a trapped bird. The pain in her collarbone subsided, leaving behind a strange, tingling warmth. Her mind reeled. What was happening? Who was this man? The word he spoke echoed in the very marrow of her bones, a note of possession so absolute it defied reason. Her body betrayed her. Instead of scrambling away, instead of succumbing to the terror that was screaming in her mind, she felt an inexplicable pull, a sense of rightness, a bizarre feeling of coming home to a place she had never known. Her fear was a wild blizzard, but beneath it, a deep, calm current was drawing her toward him. She tried to pull her hand back, but her fingers seemed fused to his skin. The golden eyes softened, the predatory intensity replaced by something achingly tender, something that looked almost like reverence. "You're her," he breathed, his voice rough with disbelief and wonder. "After all this time, you're her." Her. Who was her? Alara was an omega, a nothing, a ghost. This man, this impossible being with eyes of liquid fire, was looking at her as if she were the sunrise. It didn't make sense. None of it made sense. I don't understand," she stammered, her voice a fragile whisper. He finally moved, his hand coming up to gently cup her jaw. His touch was scorching, yet it didn't burn. It sent a shiver of pure energy through her, chasing away the bone-deep cold that had been her constant companion for years. For the first time she could remember, she felt warm, truly warm. "You will," he promised, his thumb stroking her cheek. "I have you now. Nothing else matters." He was Theron. It was an intricate spiral of silver and gold light, woven into the shape of a sleeping wolf curled around a crescent moon. It pulsed with a soft, steady warmth against her skin, a permanent reminder of the moment her world had been torn apart and remade. The claiming mark, the sign of the Alpha King's fated mate. They took her to a war camp, a temporary city of black tents and roaring fires hidden deep within the forest. It was there, in the overwhelming warmth of the king's private tent, that she finally looked at her reflection in a polished silver plate. She saw the same pale, frightened face, the same wide, uncertain eyes, but on the delicate skin of her collarbone, the mark blazed. It was beautiful and terrifying. a brand of ownership that screamed a truth her mind could not accept. She belonged to him. This life was a dream, a fever. She was given soft clothes, hot food, and a place by the fire. Theron was a constant, solid presence at her side. He spoke to her in that low, rumbling voice, telling her he had searched for her for over 200 years. He said their souls were two halves of a whole, and that her touch had not only healed his poisoned wound, but had anchored him in a way he hadn't felt in centuries. She listened, her heart torn between terrified disbelief and a desperate, burgeoning hope. Could this be real? Could someone like him, a king, a legend, truly want someone like her? Someone worthless? The self-doubt was a bitter poison she had drunk for too long. She was waiting for the trick, the punchline. The moment she would wake up, cold and alone in her lean-to, this impossible warmth just a fleeting dream. But the mark on her skin was not a dream. The look in his golden eyes was not a dream. The discovery happened on the third day. Lyra, consumed by a spiteful curiosity after Alara had not returned, had convinced her father's trackers to search for her, hoping to find her frozen corpse. Instead, they had followed the massive tracks of the king's warriors to the hidden encampment. Peering through the trees, Lyra's gaze had fallen on Alara as she stepped out of the king's tent, wrapped in his cloak. She saw the flash of silver and gold on Alara's skin. The recognition was instantaneous. Every shifter knew the legends of the Alpha King's fated mate, the one who would complete his power. And Lyra saw her not as a queen, but as an obstacle, a worthless Omega who had stumbled into a destiny that should have belonged to someone of high birth, someone like her. But Lyra's jealousy was a small, petty thing compared to the shadow that was watching from a different part of the forest. Lord Malachor, the Shadow King of the Ember Covenant, had been hunting Theron for decades. His spies were everywhere. They had seen the king's injury, had reported his strange disappearance into the blizzard, and now they reported his return and the girl he carried. They saw the mark. For Malachor, Alara was not a person. She was a key. The legends were clear. The bond was a conduit, a source of immense power, a weakness that could be exploited. If he could control the mate, he could drain the king. He could sever the bond in a ritual of dark magic, a ritual that would not only kill her, but would shatter Theron's soul, leaving him vulnerable. He saw her as a tool to achieve his ultimate goal, to overthrow the Alpha King and plunge the territories into his own twisted vision of order and darkness. Theron was called away to a war council, a meeting with his commanders to discuss the movements of the Ember Covenant. He was reluctant to leave her side, his golden eyes dark with a possessiveness that was both thrilling and terrifying. "I will not be long," he murmured, his hand gently tracing the mark on her collarbone through the soft wool of her tunic. The connection between them was a constant, humming warmth in her chest, a silent conversation that never stopped. She could feel his reluctance, his protective instincts warring with his duty. "I'll be fine," she whispered, the words still feeling foreign and small. He left, and the vast tent suddenly felt empty. Alara sat by the fire, trying to process the impossible turn her life had taken. She was no longer cold, no longer hungry. She was safe. The thought was so alien it made her dizzy. The attack was silent and swift. The tent flaps were thrown open not by Theron, but by two figures clad in black, their faces obscured by shadow-woven hoods. Before she could scream, a heavy cloth was shoved over her face. It smelled of cloying, sweet herbs that made her head swim. Her limbs grew heavy, her vision blurring at the edges. The last thing she felt was the cold, biting shock of a silver chain being clasped around her neck. The warmth in her chest vanished. It was snuffed out like a candle flame, leaving behind a void so vast and so cold it was a physical agony. The bond, the beautiful, terrifying connection to Theron, was gone. Damped by the magic-dulling properties of the silver, all she could feel now was a gaping, screaming emptiness. In the distance of her soul, she could feel a faint echo of his sudden, roaring panic, a psychic howl of pure rage and terror, but it was fading, pushed away by the suffocating power of the silver. Then there was only darkness. She awoke to the biting cold of stone and the drip, drip, drip of water somewhere in the darkness. She was in a cell. The silver chain was still around her neck, its cold weight a constant, agonizing reminder of her loss. The emptiness inside her was a living wound, a soul-deep amputation that left her gasping for breath. Every instinct screamed that a vital part of her had been ripped away. She could feel his absence like a phantom limb, an ache that was both physical and spiritual. Heavy footsteps echoed outside the cell door. A key grated in the lock, and the door swung open, spilling pale torchlight into the gloom. A man stood there, silhouetted against the light. He was tall and unnervingly graceful, with silver hair that seemed to drink the light, and eyes as black as obsidian chips. A cruel, intelligent smile played on his lips. This was Lord Malachor. "The little catalyst awakens," he said, his voice smooth and cultured, a chilling counterpoint to the raw despair clawing at her insides. He stepped into the cell, his presence sucking the very air from the small space. "What do you want?" Alara croaked, her voice raw. Malachor chuckled, a dry, rustling sound. "What every great man wants, my dear. Power. Legacy. Theron has sat on his silver throne for too long, a stagnant relic of a bygone age. He grows complacent. He grows weak." His black eyes glittered. "And now he has given me the perfect weapon to bring about his end." He reached out, his long, cold fingers tilting her chin up. He inspected the claiming mark, which was now dull and gray, robbed of its inner light by the silver collar. "This bond. A remarkable piece of magic. A direct conduit to the Alpha King's soul. He feels your terror right now, you know. Your pain. It is a festering wound in his mind, driving him mad. He is coming for you, and that is precisely what I want." Fear, cold and sharp, cut through her despair. "You're using me." "Of course," Malachor said, as if explaining something to a simple child. "You are the bait, but you are also the blade. My Ember Covenant has rediscovered the old rituals. We will place you at the center of a power siphon. We will use your bond, this beautiful, tragic connection, to drain Theron of his ancient power. We will pour it into me. And when he is nothing more than a hollow shell, I will break him. And I will break you, severing the bond and his last tie to this world." His words were a death sentence, not just for her, but for the man with golden eyes who had looked at her like she was the dawn. The man who had made her feel warm for the first time in her life. The despair was absolute, a black ocean threatening to pull her under. She was back where she started, a tool, a thing to be used and discarded, worthless. No. A flicker of defiance, small and stubborn, sparked in the cold darkness of her soul. The same resilience that had forced her to her feet after Lyra's abuse, the same instinct that had made her crawl through a blizzard to survive. She would not be his tool. She would not be the blade that ended Theron. She closed her eyes, shutting out the sight of Malicor's smug face. She turned her focus inward, into the agonizing void where the bond had been. She searched for that faint, distant echo of him. She pushed past the suffocating influence of the silver, calling to him with all of her will, all of her desperate, newfound love. Theron. The name was not a sound, but a thought, a prayer, a scream into the abyss. For a moment there was nothing, only the crushing silence and the cold. Then, a whisper. It was not a voice in her ear, but a feeling in her soul. A thread of warmth, impossibly thin but fiercely strong, pushing back against the cold. It was his presence, his indomitable will forcing its way through the magical interference. Hold on. The words were a lifeline, a promise. The warmth grew, a tiny sun in the vast emptiness. Alara, hold on. I am coming. Hope, fierce and painful and beautiful, surged through her. He was coming. The Alpha King was coming. Malicor, seeing the shift in her expression, frowned. Ah, you feel him. How touching. Let his imminent arrival give you comfort in your final moments. He turned and swept from the cell, the door slamming shut, plunging her back into darkness. But she was no longer alone in it. The ritual chamber was a cavernous space, the stone walls carved with twisting, malevolent runes that seemed to writhe in the torchlight. At its center was a raised dais of black obsidian, and it was here they chained her. The silver collar was connected to thicker chains that bound her wrists and ankles to the cold stone. She was the focal point of the entire horrific design. Malicor stood before her, flanked by his cloaked acolytes of the Ember Covenant. He held a ceremonial dagger, its blade forged from obsidian and quenched in shadow. "The moon is at its zenith," he proclaimed, his voice echoing in the vast chamber. "The Alpha King's rage leads him to our door. Let us begin the unmaking." The acolytes began to chant, a low, guttural drone that made the air feel thick and heavy. The runes on the walls began to glow with a sickly purple light, the energy flowing from them, through the stone, and into the chains that held her. Agony, unlike anything she had ever felt, tore through her. It was worse than the brand of the bond, worse than Lyra's boot grinding her hand into the ice. This was a violation of her soul. She could feel the magic sinking its hooks into the faint connection with Theron, pulling, tearing, trying to rip it out by the roots. She screamed, a raw, animal sound of pure torment. And through the bond, she felt his answering roar of fury. That was when the entire fortress shook. A sound like a thunderclap ripped through the stone as the main gates of the stronghold were blasted inward. The chanting of the acolytes faltered. The screams of men and the savage howls of wolves echoed up from the courtyards below. He was here. Malicor's face twisted into a mask of triumphant rage. "He comes! Press the ritual! Drain him now!" The pain intensified. Alara felt a wave of dizziness, her life force being pulled from her, drawn into the obsidian dais. Through the bond, she felt Theron stumble. She felt his strength beginning to wane, siphoned away by this dark magic. He was fighting his way through Malicor's forces, but the ritual was weakening him with every step he took. "No," she whimpered, pulling against the chains. "No!" The doors to the ritual chamber burst open. Theron stood there, a figure of beautiful, terrible wrath. His golden eyes were blazing infernos. His warriors, his black guard, poured in behind him, a wave of disciplined fury, and the chamber erupted into a chaotic battle of steel and claw. But Theron had eyes only for her. He saw her, chained and broken on the altar, and a sound of pure anguish escaped him. He charged forward, cutting a swath through the acolytes who tried to stop him. "King Theron!" Malacor's voice was a venomous whip crack. "You are too late. Your power is already mine." Malacor met Theron's charge. The two alphas clashed in the center of the room, a blur of motion and raw power. But Malacor was right. The ritual had taken its toll. Theron was slower, his movements lacking their usual devastating force. Malacor, empowered by the stolen energy, pressed his advantage. With a final, desperate move, Malacor's obsidian dagger sliced across Theron's chest. The king staggered back, a deep gash weeping blood. He fell to one knee, his golden eyes flickering, his breath coming in ragged gasps. He looked at Alara, his expression one of profound agony and regret. Seeing him fall, seeing him wounded and vulnerable because of her, something inside Alara broke. It was not the fragile, hopeless breaking of before. This was the shattering of a dam. All the years of being called worthless, of being told she was nothing, of swallowing her pain and her anger, it all came rushing to the surface. And it was mingled with the fierce, brilliant, protective love she felt for the man on his knees. The power that had lain dormant within her, the hidden spring that Malacor had mistaken for a simple conduit, erupted. It was not a scream. It was a sun. A wave of pure white gold light exploded from her, a nova of life and healing and righteous fury. The silver chains holding her turned to dust. The purple light of the runes was scoured from the walls. The acolytes were thrown back, their dark magic incinerated by the pure, untainted power she unleashed. The light washed over Theron, and his wound sealed itself in a heartbeat. His strength returned in a rushing tide, his golden eyes widening in stunned awe as he stared at her. Alara rose from the altar, no longer a victim, but a vessel of immense power. The light clung to her, making her skin glow and her hair float around her as if she were underwater. The claiming mark on her collarbone blazed with the intensity of a star. She turned her gaze on Malacor. The Shadow King stared, his face a mask of disbelief and terror. What are you?" he stammered. Alara took a step forward, the stone floor cracking under her feet. Her voice, when she spoke, was not the whisper of an Omega. It was the command of a queen, resonant with an ancient power she was only just beginning to understand. "You called me a catalyst, a tool. You called me nothing," she said, each word a hammer blow of judgment. The light around her intensified. "I was never nothing. You were just too blind to see." She raised her hand and the light gathered there, a miniature sun of devastating power. "This is for him," she declared, her voice ringing with absolute finality. She unleashed the power. It wasn't a physical blast, but a wave of pure, unmaking light. It struck Malacor, and he screamed as his dark magic was unraveled, his stolen power stripped away, his very form dissolving into shadow and dust until nothing was left. Silence fell over the chamber. The battle was over. The surviving members of the Ember Covenant were on their knees, staring at her in terrified reverence. The light around her softened, receding back into her until she was just Alara again. She swayed on her feet, the exertion of her newfound power overwhelming her. Strong arms caught her before she could fall. Theron held her, his face buried in her hair. He was trembling. The Alpha King, the ancient warrior, was trembling. He pulled back, his golden eyes shining with unshed tears, his gaze full of a love so profound it stole her breath. "Alara," he breathed, his voice thick with emotion. He gently touched the blazing mark on her collarbone. "Your power. I never knew." "Neither did I," she whispered, her own tears beginning to fall. Tears of relief, of shock, of a joy so fierce it hurt. He leaned in and kissed her, a kiss that was not about possession, but about reverence. It was a kiss of equals, a meeting of two souls who had fought their way through darkness to find each other. In that kiss, she finally, truly let go of the ghost of the worthless Omega. She accepted this new reality. She accepted him. As their lips met, the mark on her skin pulsed with blinding light. Theron gasped, a sharp intake of breath, and when they parted, a new mark was emblazoned over his heart, visible through the gash in his tunic. It was the mirror of hers. A crescent moon curled around a waking wolf, glowing with the same silver and gold light. The bond was complete. It was no longer just his claim on her, but her claim on him. A willing, two-way connection that felt as solid and eternal as the mountains. He swept her up into his arms and carried her from the ruined fortress. His black guard fell into formation around them, their expressions a mixture of awe and fierce devotion. They were no longer looking at their king's rescued mate. They were looking at their queen. Days later, back in the great stone hall of Theron's mountain citadel, he stood with her before his people. Thousands of shifters, the lords and ladies of the great packs of the north, were assembled. Whispers had spread like wildfire. The story of her capture, of the king's wrath, and of the impossible power she had unleashed. Theron, with Alara at his side, raised his hand for silence. His voice, amplified by the hall's acoustics, boomed with authority and pride. For centuries, our people have awaited the prophecy of the soul healer, the one whose light would push back the encroaching shadow. I have searched for her my entire life. I have found her. He turned to her, his gaze soft. You know her as Alara, but she is more than the mate to my soul. She is the heart of our people, the bringer of light. He took her hand and raised it high. Behold your queen! A collective gasp went through the hall, followed by a deafening roar of approval. One by one, then in a great wave, the assembled packs knelt. They knelt to their king, and they knelt to her. Alara looked out at the sea of bowing heads. She saw Lyra in the crowd, her face pale with shock and a dawning, horrified respect. She saw the faces of 1,000 strangers, all looking at her with reverence. For so long she had been invisible, a shadow surviving in the margins. For so long her world had been defined by cold, by pain, by the crushing weight of her own perceived worthlessness. But now, standing beside Theron, his hand warm and solid in hers, the bond between them a steady, loving pulse against her heart, she felt none of that. She was not worthless. She was a survivor. She was not invisible. She was seen. She was not an Omega. She was a queen. And for the first time in her entire life, she was finally, truly, home. A gentle smile touched her lips, the first genuine smile she had felt in years. It was like the sun breaking through the clouds after a long and bitter winter. It was the beginning of everything.